Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our fall edible class. I want to go back this screen to make sure it stays there for a moment. I welcome everybody who has come to maybe think about doing a fall garden. I look at fall gardening as the best time of the year to garden because it's a delicious time, it's a beautiful time, the weather's so much better, and it's an easy garden to do. So if you've never thought of doing a fall garden before, let's get to it and do it. I've talked to many people and they're thinking it's when you get to the end of the summer, you just pull everything out and you're done. And I want to encourage you to think about other ways to enjoy your gardening, but making it super relaxing too. So here we go. I look at fall gardening, as I said, as something that's fun. You have less heat, you have less bugs, less disease. It's more relaxed gardening, and the weather will tell you when it's time to be done with it. So here we go. Here's my goals for tonight. I would like you to look at this from the viewpoint of making it simple and fun. Grow what you like to eat and learn about some fall crops maybe you hadn't thought about, maybe some herbs you didn't think you could do, and think about some new options. So yes, we like to grow what we like to eat, but always like to add a little something to it. When do we start this garden? We're going to talk about it. How light can you start? We're going to discuss a little bit about some microclimates. I want to introduce the idea of phenology because we're going to have something about that coming up in the new year. I'll talk about your fall basic crops and your herbs. We are trying to avoid insects by doing this simple fall garden, but they still are out there. They still will affect some of your crops, but we're going to try to minimize that. We do need to talk about soil because if you don't have any good soil, it doesn't matter what seed you put out there, you're not going to get anything good for it. I'd like to encourage you to think about mixing and matching your colors and creating a garden that's not just edible, but also pretty. And then at the end of the day, we do need to clean it up. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about sweet potatoes and pumpkins because we all love those for the fall. And recording your experience, I think, is an important element here. And it's not just, oh, everybody tells me to do this. There's a reason you should and will want to start doing this. So here we go. October is a great month for starting a fall garden. And I'm sure most of you just thought, did she just say October? And yes, I'm saying October because we get so much rain and so much wet. And I don't know about anybody else, but today I got 3 inches of rain. I've measured it in a bucket that I keep in the back porch, and we got 3 inches of rain today. And that's generally what starts happening at the very end of August and the beginning of September. We start getting tropical storms and we start getting hurricanes, and that affects when we start planting things because the weather is so difficult to get something in. So if you can wait just a little bit longer to October, you're going to still be able to get your crops in, your plants in, and get a viable garden. Here are the fall temperatures that we're kind of dealing with here in Virginia Beach. September, 81, 66 at night. October, 71, 56. Now, all the veggies that we're going to be putting in are all going to be cool weather crops. So they want those lower temperatures. And it's difficult right at the end of August, beginning of September, to still have those temperatures. I've been taking my soil temperature, so it's not just air temperature that we're worried about or concerned about. The soil temperature is very important too. So I started taking the temperatures to give you kind of a feel for various parts of my yard and what those temperatures are doing at the moment. So I have a front yard pot, very shaded area. In the morning, my pot will be about 82, by noon, 90. But if you look at the very bottom there, where I said garden/RB, that's my raised bed. This garden gets basically sunlight from about 10 o'clock in the morning till about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And in the middle of the day, I have 110 degrees. And if I'm trying to grow cool weather crops, it's not going to do real well. Some of them will germinate, but not what you will be expecting. So we want to hold this off as much as we can. About 5, 6, 7 years ago, I would have tried starting my garden right at the very beginning of September, but kept finding out that I was not getting the best situation for getting those plants to germinate. Here's a seed germination temperature chart. So if I was going to do beans, 65 is a good temperature to do those up until 85. But I want to start doing things like beets. And I need my soil and my temperatures to be in the 50 to 85 range. If I want to do Swiss chard, that's one of those vegetables that kind of slides around. It seems to be able to take nice cool temperatures, but it also will take some heat. But I want to put in spinach. Spinach is a great fall crop. And look at the temperatures that we're needing there, 50 to 65. So if you're trying to put your spinach in next week, chances are not great that you're going to get a lot of germination. You will get something always does come out, but you're better off waiting. Peas are also one of those items that they're a early spring crop normally, and we're trying to do them in the fall. So if we can get those lower temperatures for the soil and for the heat, you're going to have a much better opportunity to have a crop. Versus look at my tomatoes. My tomatoes want a 65 to 85. And you know as well as I do, those are summer crops. Those are warm weather crops, and they want those temperatures. And when you try to put them out when it's much lower temperatures, they don't do particularly well either. So we have to go with what the seed likes, not what we might want to be able to do. I always put up, or I always like to point out our plant hardiness zones and microclimates. We always have the USDA plant hardiness zone, and the Virginia Beach, Hampton, Suffolk area is the 8A. And what that means is we can expect the average annual winter temperature to be 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you would like to look at other various charts, I've given you a website that you can take a look at here. I think most of us would probably agree, though, here in the Virginia Beach area, that it is rare that we get an average annual winter of 10 to 15 degrees. We're usually more in the 25, 30, 45, 50 through most of the winter until we get maybe a week of a cold snap that will take us down into the frigid zone. And depending how long that lasts, that will affect whether or not your crop's going to keep going or whether or not you're going to bite the dust. But what makes things work here in our cute little corner of the world, and truly we do have a cute little corner of the world here for growing fall crops, is our microclimates. And in your case, we're going to talk about a microclimate for your yard. So a microclimate officially is the climate of a very small or restricted area, especially when it differs from the climate of the surrounding area. So in your yard, you have various microclimates, all depending on how much sun you're going to get, how much shade you're going to get, and if you're going to have a house in the way or you're going to have trees in the way, and how that's going to change through the fall period. So you need to take a look at it. And yes, I just said something about microclimates and I'm bringing it right back. Because I want to reiterate this to you. So I'm kind of double downing here. I'm going around your own yard and taking a look for fall, what you want to do. Now, here's an example of a microclimate in my yard. These are pansies. They don't look great. I did not give them any TLC, but they are sitting in August in the front of my house. And they are pansies, and you really, not a great picture because I don't take super great pictures. Nobody ever hands me the phone to say, take a picture. But I have a pot here of pansies that have been growing and flowering all through the season. It shouldn't be here. This is not what pansies like. But because my front yard barely gets 2 hours of sunlight, I'm completely shaded with trees. I don't get much sun, and these have decided to keep on going. I even have a poinsettia that I have in another area in the front of the house that I put out in early spring once it was, not freezing or whatever. And it has been growing all through the summer, and that poinsettia will flower out in the fall in the front yard until it freezes. So depending on your microclimate, you can get things to grow. And that's what I want you to think about. What is your fall seasonal microclimate? Because it's different than your spring seasonal microclimate. We're now heading into shorter days and lowering temperatures. And we've got leaves that are now starting to fall off the trees. So whereas I've not been able to get sun on certain parts of my yard because even my backyard is completely covered by trees. Yes, I do have a bunch of pines that mess with me, but I do have a lot of hardwoods, and all those leaves prevent me from getting a lot of sunshine in various parts of my garden. So I have to look at this now from the viewpoint of what's going to happen when those leaves start falling off. What's going to happen as the days start getting shorter. And this is where I would like to say to you to think about doing some record keeping. Get a notebook and think about keeping a chart of now for like the next couple of weeks, or maybe just for a week, but go around your yard and figure out, where is your sun coming up? If you don't know where north, south, east, and west is in your yard, most phones nowadays have a compass on them, so you can find that out if you want to. But as you walk around your yard, take a look around your yard. Look up a little bit. What kind of trees do you have? Where is the sun hitting your house? How are you going to put these cool weather crops in, some that like more sun than others, and make it so that they are going to have the optimal opportunity to grow through your fall time. Okay, so I'm going to put a plug in here for you all to start either a notebook, a journal, a memory book, call it what you want to, decorate it with stickers if you want to. It doesn't have to be fancy, but my suggestion to you is that you make this a long-term notebook. 5 years is a good way to watch what's happening in your yard. And some of the things that we're going to talk about, you're going to see why I want you to go that long. So let's say you start a notebook and you separate it between, you want 5-year sections, but within each of those year sections, break it up into the 4 sections of the seasons, or the 3 sections if you want to just create fall and winter as one section. But divide it up so you can draw your fall map, so you can remember next year what you put and where you put it, and whether or not it did a good job or not. You are not going to remember. I can guarantee you, you are not going to remember. Right now, if I were to ask you what you planted in spring and what did well and what didn't, and where did you put it, you're not going to remember. So next year, it's going to be kind of a crapshoot. You're going to try it again, and hopefully you're going to be putting things where they're supposed to be. You're going to remember which crops kind of didn't do well or got diseased, or maybe where you put your tomatoes, you don't want to put them there the next year. But if you're not drawing this out, you're not doing a little notebook, you're not going to remember. So this is my suggestion to you. Like I said, it doesn't have to be fancy. I've used fancy. I've used the one from New York Botanical Society, and where it looked beautiful, it really wasn't all that practical. So practical is what you want, simple, and get it down on paper. And the last thing I suggested at the very bottom, whatever you can remember about what you did for spring and summer, at the very back of your notebook, maybe just jot down all the things you remember, whether it's crops that you liked, things that didn't do well, just so when you start again in January, start thinking about your 2024 gardens, you can take a look back there and have an idea of what you would like to do again. So that's my plug for doing a journal, because I think it's extremely important. Hey, I'd like to do a little sidebar here and take a time out. We've been talking about temperatures, but I'd like to talk just for a moment about the concept of phenology. Without a doubt, this has been one strange year for weather. Record temperatures, record flooding. You cannot turn on the news without them basically starting with the weather and where is it going to be awful. Cape Cod had a tornado. They don't get tornadoes. All these things are crazy. And all these things affect how all the animal life is affected by how the climates are changing. So back in the 1880s, they started with the science of phenology. And while that's been around for a while, in the 1960s, it's really taken off. So what is phenology? It's essentially the study of the cyclic and seasonal natural phenomena, especially in relation to climate and plant and animal life. Essentially, as the climate changes, scientists are trying to understand how plants and animals are responding to a warming climate. That impact has a domino effect. For example, if spring comes 3 weeks early, what does that mean for the insects, the birds, and the wildlife, and how they interact? How will that affect crops that depend on pollinators? If spring came early, and they didn't come with it, and they've come out 3 weeks later, how does that affect whether the pollinator is going to be ready for the crop that's been put in 3 weeks earlier because the farmer was able to do that? There's a whole host and range of questions and considerations being collected right now. And you and I can be part of those citizen scientists helping to collect the data. And there's two ways we can do this. The first is the USA National Phenology Network, and I give you the website there. So if you want to take a little picture of that. And then the second thing is Nature's Notebook, which is an app that's associated with a National Phenology Network. We're going to do a master gardening talk on phenology. We have a professor from out of ODU, and she'll do a talk on January 22nd, 2024 for this. And she's really, really going to encourage us in our little pocket of the world over here, our little corner, because for some reason, when they look at data that's showing up on their website, our area is not particularly well represented. So I think she would like to encourage us to do that. What I've put up here is just a real quick screenshot of what the National Phenology Network looks like, and then what Nature's Notebook looks like. They're connected. The notebook is something that you put on your phone, and you can, there's a whole host of different things you can get information. It's different projects you can add to if you want to or become part of. You can create your own project if you want to and send the data. So there's lots of interesting things that you can find on it. This is just one page of a pheno forecast map of just one example is what I'm trying to show you. Tip of the iceberg of what you can find on this website. And it's, you can spend hours on it because it's so interesting. At least I thought it was interesting. So touch base with it. Come back and join us on the 22nd in the new year, and you'll get some more information about how you can support it too. But let's go back to our fall garden and what we want to grow. The list of crops that we do for a fall garden are essentially the same crops that we're going to do in the spring, with a few exceptions. I call these the Benjamin Button crops because we're growing them backwards. Normally in the spring, you put it in, the soil's nice and cool, it's going to get warmer. But we're starting backwards. We're starting with the soil a little bit warmer than we might want it to be. And then we're going to go down into longer, cooler and cooler days and cooler nights. Either way, at the end of the day, our crops or our garden's going to end because of the weather. Fortunately for us in Tidewater, we're in this little corner of the world that we're so lucky to live in. We can get away with murder when it comes to doing a fall garden. And a lot of the crops that we're going to be able to put in, most of them will survive through the winter, even if we have a 2 or 3 or 4 days of frost or a freeze. Most of them will be okay. Lettuces survive, but they tend not to survive that you want to eat them. They get kind of rubbery and a little bitter, but the rest of them, like the spinach and the collards and kales and things like that, will keep on going. So what do we want to do for our easy garden? And when I say easy, I'm trying to look for a garden that's not going to need too much of your TLC, that's not going to require a lot of your time to get out there. You're going to plant it and let it do its thing. So on the left-hand side are the crops that I'm going to say to you. These are the easy fall crops. Some of them are brassicas, some of them are not. But these are the things that I can guarantee they will grow, they will do well. Not everything is harvestable right there here in the fall of October, November, December. Some of the things you have to wait for the spring, but you plant them now. The things that are more challenging are the items that are on the right. And those are the brassicas, like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts. I'm not pushing those. If you want to risk it, you are welcome to do so. But because those are pure pest magnets, they are the love of the life for the cabbage moth, and they love to burrow down and just go to town on your product. So if you look at my list, somewhere along on the easy thing, I have like plus signs. Those are also brassicas, but they're easier. Even if the bugs are going to get to them, you're going to have a better chance of surviving. The ones on the right, the challenging crops, not so much. They burrow down and they really can do a lot of damage on it long before your crop is ready to be picked. So quickly, easy crops. The arugulas, everyone knows about arugula because it's easy. It's the fastest thing that's going to pop out of your soil. I'm really pushing bok choy, tatsoi, and mizuna. Most of you know the bok choys. I'm not so sure you're familiar with the tatsoi. It's another version of like a bok choy, but whereas in the center thing, I have a bok choy here, the white holds a lot of water and it can be compromised. The one on the right is a tatsoi, and it almost grows, it looks like a wedding bouquet. It will get that big, and as you pull it out and hold it and walk down the aisle with it. It's delicious to use. It's easy to cook with, whether it's stir fries, whether you're putting in a salad, it's raw and whatnot. It's all delicious. I recommend a mescaline mix for those of you who want to do this as simple as you can. You've got one big box that you want to use, or one spot that you want to just cast everything. And to me, the mescaline mixes are the kitchen sink of gardening. You broadcast these seeds, you wait to see what comes up. It's going to be a mix and match of lettuces and various kales, and it's surprise gardening because every one of the companies that do put these out, their fall or their spring mix, it's usually a little bit different depending on what you're going to get. So it's kind of like, you know, a surprise bag when you throw this out. So if you really want it simple, go for a mescaline mix. The other items that are easy to do are onions and garlics. These are going to be a long time. You're going to have to wait for these. I like to recommend leeks. And again, you're going to harvest those in the spring. But if you want the leek to have a nice white color so that you get a white stem, because that's what you really want to use when you're cooking, you do need to go out there and mound some dirt around it as it starts growing. Kind of like you do with potatoes. You kind of hill up the potatoes so you get more and more potatoes and you have less and less greenery. With the leeks, you want to do that around the base of them if you can. Snow peas I love, but if you don't have something to climb on, shoot for a variety that's more like a Tom Thumb. It will look more bushy. Swiss chard is my absolute favorite for any fall garden because this sucker goes on forever. I've had Swiss chards grow from fall of like 2021 to fall of 2022. It just kept on going because I put it in the right microclimate. I had it in shade. I was able to keep it underneath some things so it didn't get the broiling sun, and it was able to keep it going, and it was delicious, and it just kept going through the next fall. And spinach is also one of those things that it's a wonderful fall crop. It's delicious, it's excellent for you, but you need to look at this from a fall microclimate. If you normally it wants less sun and longer periods of shade, but you're automatically going to get that. As you can see, the days just keep getting shorter, as you can well see, and we need to be able to still be able to have enough sunlight for the fall crop of spinach. But if you want it to go into the spring, think about where you can get a little bit of shade and then some sun that won't broil it, so you can get into the spring a little bit and not have to replant it. So root crops. Can't say enough about radishes. If you really like them, go for it. There's so many different kinds since you can get out there. There's a watermelon one that when you cut it open, it's reddish inside. There's long skinny ones like your daikon, which are absolutely delicious. I'm also recommending beets. And if you haven't tried a golden beet, some of them are almost yellow. Some of them are more like an orange grow. And in talking to some of the farmers around here, they really like the orange ones because when it starts to rain, it really grows a little bit faster than the red ones or the normal red beets. So think about doing that. They're also delicious in recipes in the fall. Carrots are great. If you want to harvest them early, go for a shorter version, but they generally will make it through the winter and you will get carrots come spring. Sometimes if the ground freezes, like if you've got them in a container, 10 to 1, if we've had 6-7 days of a freeze, your soil probably froze. So it's going to be iffy whether or not they're going to keep growing or how pithy they're going to be when you take them out. So sometimes the weather does definitely compromise some of the vegetables toward the end of the winter. I'd like to recommend, if I can, a turnip. Now, normally in our area, we get that purple top turnip and they're okay. Not my favorite, but my favorite is And what I'd like to recommend, and something I've noticed the farmers around here are starting to plant more of, is something called a Hakurei turnip. And you can find this on any good gardening catalog will have it. It's a turnip that basically looks like a white radish. If you leave it in all winter, it will grow and it's still edible. But as we start getting into the bug season, the bugs love it. But if you pick this when it's about the size of a golf ball and then bake them or roast them, it caramelizes and it is so sweet and delicious. So that's my push for a few more of the Asian vegetables that you might not have thought about, and it will make a very delicious crop for you. Okay, the brassicas. We can't avoid them, even though I'm trying to only give you the easy ones. Collards are a staple around here, needless to say. And years ago at ARAC, during it's an experimental research station, they created a version that works really super well around here, and it's called a Bates collard. I've done other collards when I did a more professional garden. We tried an Alabama blue. It didn't do particularly well in our particular area, but the Vates does a really good job. So if you are looking for that, go for it. Another other types of the cole crops that I do like, and the variety is just infinite, it seems, that you can get. So the kales, there's lots of different ones. Over to the right, I've got some red Russian. Believe that is another one. Oh, that's a mustard down there. I've got this kale. This kale over here makes delicious kale chips. If you want to make a kale chip, get yourself something that's got a little bit of heft to it, a lot of ridges and whatnot. Base it with your olive oil, a little bit of salt, maybe a little garlic, and roast it for about 10 minutes in a 400-degree oven. Watch it carefully because it turns quick. But these end up being so crunchy, and they're just delicious. Because most people, when I say grow some kale, they'll roll their eyes and like, yuck, I can't stand that. They're delicious. And you just have to keep experimenting a little bit with some of your kales to make sure that you find something that you really like. The mustards are delicious, but what I really like to grow them for is two things. Just the color. I don't like to put a lot of mustards in my cooking per se. The standard mustards do really large leaves, and later on I'll show you a picture of how mustards can be used. But if you need to sanitize your soil, one of the things that you can do if you use a bed that's all just mustards, and you can eat them in the meantime, but at the end, when it looks before a frost comes along, if you chop it up and turn it into the soil, it will help get rid of nematodes and things like that. You may have to do it a couple of seasons in a row, but it does work. And here, again, I'm talking about Mizuna. I talked about it with Asian greens, and I want to talk about it now because the Mizunas are a wonderful, wonderful crop. It goes into the spring. They're delicious. They can go in salads. They can go in your any kind of soup type that you want, but they are really good for an ornamental crop if you want to make your garden look good. So that's my push on various things here. I'll take 10 seconds on your challenging brassicas. There's so much work that you have to do with these to make them get through the fall with the pests. So if you're going to do it, know that the pests will have a heyday with it. You're going to have to treat them. And because I'm trying to push for more of an organic garden, I'm not really pushing these crops, but they can be done if you really want to. But since I'm really encouraging simple gardening, for the rest of us, we'll be glad when you're eating that broccoli spear, but we may not be eating it with you. So, herbs for the garden. The things that really do super well are parsley and dill, cilantro. Especially the parsley loves the season. The bugs like it too, but you can usually get around that. The dill is fantastic if it goes through the season. Try to dry as much as you can, but let it bolt out through the spring if you can. And the seed heads that come off of it are early seeds for the birds. And I'm always trying to get my birds to like me in my yard. And so I try to leave what I can for them to make sure that they come along. We've got rosemary, sage, chives or garlic chives, I like to put thyme, but in a pot, and oregano needs to go in a pot. And anise hyssop really isn't either anise or hyssop. It's more the mint family, but it smells like licorice, and it can be used in cooking. The seeds and whatnot can be used as far as that goes. So I'd like to just push the concept of anise hyssop. Most people look at this and she's like, oh my God, she's offering me a mint and it's going to go everywhere. But this particular one tends to grow straight up and it gets woody at the end of the season, and you can cut it off and it'll do a second crop somewhere late July when it looks like the seed heads are toast. If you cut it off down to where there's some leaves, it will start all over again and bring you another round of great, beautiful flowers in your garden. The birds absolutely love it. The butterflies absolutely love it. So if you can offer this pollinator on a long-term basis, please do. You can put out seeds if you've got somebody, if you can find some. Like right now, I have 4 different anise growing in a pot that the birds dropped it somewhere, and I'm going to transplant those. So if you can find that, great. Otherwise, it's going to come up for next spring if you put out the seeds now, and then it'll be there for the fall as you need it. But it's just a gorgeous plant, and it's so easy to weed it out if you get too much. So that's my plug for that. Herbs generally don't like a lot of TLC. Give them some sunlight and they'll be fine. So over here is an herb bed that I've got. I've got thyme. This is curry. This was a 50-cent plant that I stuck in there and hoped it would do something. It took over. I've got sage back here. This is how much herbs could care less about what I do for them. This is that sage plant is right over here. And if you look down here, I've got a black pot, because when I brought this home, it was a tiny little plant, and I laid it down in this raised bed, and I thought, I'll get back to that sucker. And I never did. And the next thing I knew, it had set itself into the garden. It had gone through the bottom of the pot, and now it has probably a wood stem that's about 5-6 inches thick. It's never coming out of this pot. This thing starts all through spring, summer, fall. I have to cut it back horrendously. No one needs this much sage. But it does smell. If you come to my side yard, between that and the curry, the two things are overpowering. But here's another sage plant. This is what I mean, that you really won't not be able to get your herbs to grow. I stuck this in a bucket. Occasionally I remember to water it and it keeps on going. This last sage plant got stuck behind my greenhouse, didn't know it was there, kept growing it, haven't watered it once through this season, and it's still growing. So you can get away with murder when it comes to herbs, is what I'm saying. You don't have to be too tender. Probably the only one that is a little temperamental as to where you put it would be thyme. And if you tend to put it in a place that is more rocky, drains really well, it'll do okay. Pots do really well too, because then you can control how much water you're going to get. One thing I'd like to encourage you to do, no matter what you're going to plant this year, is get out of your comfort zone and just choose one veggie and one herb that you didn't ever try before. So in my case, and I know you're going to laugh, I'm going to plant collards because I generally do not grow collards. I wasn't raised with them. I don't cook with them that much. But this past fall, I did a recipe that was dolmades, which is normally a grape leaf. But in this case, we use collard leaves. You cut out the white rib there and use the rest of the leaf as like it was a grape leaf. And then you cook it up, and it was just delicious. So I thought, okay, I'm going to give this a shot. And I'm not a big fan of cilantro myself, so I wanted to try this other Vietnamese one. And so I'm going to give it a shot. So my challenge to you is, if you're going to do this garden, try to do it and add some things that are different. So here is something that most people like to eat during the fall. They like sweet potatoes. They, of course, want to go pumpkin picking. But the thing is, with those two crops, you have to plant these in the spring. I'm not necessarily pushing for the pumpkins because you need a lot of space to do that. But I am pushing for the sweet potatoes and thinking about next year that you'll be able to pick them if you write it down in your notebook tonight or this winter, and remind yourself to get some slips and plant some sweet potatoes. On the right is a sweet potato that I bought 10 years ago, red sweet potatoes from Lancaster's farmer's market, and I'm still propagating it. If you take off these two little sprouts and stick them in a glass of water, each gets its own glass, it'll root out and you'll be able to stick it in after the last frost, and the vines will continue to grow through the season. Most of your sweet potatoes will end up at the spot where you first plant the slip, but some of the vines will grow out and they'll stick their roots down. One, to send info or nutrients back to the main source, but also it'll add some little sweet potatoes out there. So on the right here is a grow bag, a red grow bag, and we dumped out the sweet potatoes. So most of these were like 4 or 5 pounds. It doesn't look like that, but trust me, they were. And to the right, these are sweet potatoes. To the left are sweet potatoes we got out of Francis Land House. These are really large. And then you have to cure them. So they're not like regular potatoes. They're not of the potato family. They're of the morning glory family. But you have to harden them up. I don't know if you've ever been in the grocery store and you've seen some of the sweet potatoes and they look like they've got sap on them. Well, that's the sugar that makes them so sweet. So you have to be careful when you're taking them out of the ground. You don't wash them off and scrub them up. You need to let the outer skin for about a couple of weeks just sit in a cool, dry place and get hard, and then you can buff them off a little bit with a soft cloth and store them. But it's another plug, but in this case, in order to get that fall crop, you have to think about doing it in the spring. Of course, we want garden with colors, so I'm going to push for some pansies because those go all through the seasons. If you get some snapdragons, that will be lovely for right now. Both of these you're going to have to buy. You're not going to start either of these with seeds at this point. The pansies, as you can well see, what I told you, I had one that went all the way to August. They'll keep growing. The snapdragons will die back, but they'll come back and be one of your first flowers for the spring. So think of color. And when you're thinking about planting, how you're going to do this, I would like you to think about doing it from a color palette, even though, you know, we're talking scientifically about how you do this and how you do that. When you put this stuff together, you might as well make your garden look pretty. It doesn't have to all be rigid rows. Over here, I've got a green, a red, a green, a red, and a green mustard. And it just looks different. In my pots here, I have a pansy, red lettuces, and 2 other kinds of lettuces. This over here, that's a tatsoi growing with a red Russian kale, and it makes the pot look more interesting. So if you can get a little creative so that fall will look much, much prettier out in your backyard than just a whole bunch of rows of stuff. So here's one of the things that all these various things that I put together. And this is what I picked. And one day on the right was my plate that what I picked. And on the left was another pot that I picked out. And that's what I'm encouraging you to do. You try to get a plate full of food for the fall like you've never had before. So if you want to make that happen, though, you've got to have good soil. So there's 3 different scenarios that now that we're coming to the end of a summer garden, many of you are going to have to, you know, take out some of those summer crops and start thinking about it. So we're going to need to do a little bit of boosting of your post-summer crop. If you're just starting a new in-ground garden, we need to give it some nutrients. And if you're taking a raised bed or a container like a big pot, we need to get some good soil in there too. And the best way to do that for revitalizing your post-summer soil is to add compost. If you can go to the nursery and get some good compost and rake it into your soil, you don't need to till this in. Your crops are not going to go super down far, but you don't also want to be planting directly into compost, particularly if you get something that has some cow manure or chicken manure in it. That's a little acidic. It needs to be turned in so that it will seed out. If you are a first-time gardener, this is you've decided, you know, it was too hot this summer, I'm going to now start my fall garden, but you've never put anything in this particular spot where you want to grow this garden, you need to get a soil test. You need to know what's in there before you just start dumping stuff on top of it. The soil tests are easy to do. If you go to the local library or you go to the extension office, you can get them. When you send it in, there it tells you exactly how to get the soil sample, what to do. They will email your results within a week, and it then tells you what you need to add to it. Go from there. So right now would be a great time to go out and start getting your soil tests if you're starting. If you're a first-time gardener, but you're using raised beds or containers, clearly you have to build it. I don't want to talk about, what you can build it with. There's lots of various things. Our crops for fall generally are shallow rooted, but if you're making this raised bed, it's clear that you're probably going to use it for spring and summer. So try to make at least 8 to 12 inches for your minimum raised bed if you can. So if you are going to come up with doing squashes or doing tomatoes in the summer, you've got enough root space for that. Okay. You've got to get some soil in those raised beds. You've got to get some soil in those containers. And this is the soil recipe I'd like you to take a look at. If this is what we use at the Virginia Beach Master Garden Kitchen Garden, if you look at the very, very, very bottom, that is the place where they got this particular recipe. It's a homemade potting media. Just either take a snapshot of this with your phone so that you know what to do, or if you've got a little scrap paper, you're taking some notes, go ahead and put this particular link down there so you can go back and get the full shamil. But basically, it's equal parts of compost, peat moss, either perlite, vermiculite, or builders. Generally, we like to push for the vermiculite, and 4 tablespoons of lime per gallon. And that's going to get you done and done well for starting this year. Next year, you'll have to add some more compost. Okay. Okay, we planted great, easy crops, but that didn't mean that we totally can avoid the pests. So I'd like to just point out to you what's going to come visit you. In the fall, we always see that beautiful little white moth flitting around. We don't see the brown one as much because he's not so obvious. He seems to meld into the scenery. But both of them, at the end of the day, after they lay their eggs, you're going to end up getting a cute little green worm just like that. So their growing season, so to speak, is a cabbage worm starts laying its eggs. It'll keep on going and going and going for about, it'll grow about 5 times, and it can destroy your plants. My suggestion to you is try to avoid doing any spraying if you can. As soon as you start seeing the little holes, flip your leaf over because they're on the bottom side of the leaf. They're not on the top, and just squish them if you can. If you have to use insecticidal soap, you can, but I'm trying to make this as organic as possible. And you can generally keep them hold on this until the fall temperatures get so cool that it just stops the moth from doing any more egg laying. Okay, so this is what happens in a 30 to 45 day period. And if we still have warm weather, and we've had this happen before, we're all the way through December, we're still in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and these things are still laying eggs. And we have to be more careful. We don't know what this fall is going to be. Let's hope it'll go to school, but we don't know. So you have to be prepared for it. If you want to control pests because you've chosen to do the larger brassicas, I'll very quickly say to you, if you use a row cover, you have hope. And there is an extension publication that will talk to you about what you have to do. If you do choose to do some insecticidal soap on the kales, if you spray underneath the leaf, that will take care of some, but you still got to kind of squish them off there. BT will help. It definitely does help for the brassicas like the cabbages and whatnot, but I'm not going to go into it. If you're going to choose to use it, what I have to say to you is the label is the law. You need to read the label front and back to know what it is that you're using, what it's going to do to your crops, what it's going to do to the soil, everything else. You need to read that label, okay? But if you're using the simple crops, the easy crops, you're probably not going to need any BT. I've never needed to use BT when I've just put in kales and collards, well, not collards, but kales and cabbages, or excuse me, kales and lettuces and things like that. Here are some additional control methods. You can buy these on various websites. These I'm pretty sure are stock pictures. This is something I use. It's currently over a cucumber plant that I didn't want a raccoon to dig up on me. but I got these at the dollar store or the $1.25 store. On Amazon, I saw the same thing for 10 for $49. So go to the dollar store. But I thought this was creative too, to get going, just to protect a plant to begin with. And then once the temperatures start falling, and then you're talking about late October, early November, those cabbage moths aren't laying eggs anymore. So this thing just comes right off. But this keeps your plant warm if you needed it. It's just a practical way to deal with it without spending a lot of money. So checklist before you're planting, choose crops. Let me just point out that if you go to any of the big box stores or any of the nurseries right now, all you're going to see for seeds will be what they ordered in the spring, and it's what's left over. So you may need to go online and order some seeds if you don't have leftover seeds from your spring plantings. And you wouldn't have any leftover collards because you wouldn't have planted those. You would have some of the kales for sure. So if you need to, get online and start looking. There's so many different good seed companies out there that you can get good seeds from. Go to the stores if you need to buy some plants. If you're really late in the game, it's, you want to start this October 15th, you're going to need some plants at that point. And rebuild or build your soil before you get going. Okay. I always like to suggest to people that they read the package. And just so you know, this is a picture of that Mizuna again. Have you noticed how much I like Mizuna? It's wonderful. This is the green one, but there is a red one that is just fabulous. And I've used it as hedgerows and things like that, and it goes into the summer. But I'm suggesting that you read the package so you know. Direct seed an inch apart, they're going to get big, and then you're going to have to eventually thin them out. This, as most seed packets will say, wait till last frost is over with, and then go ahead and start planting, because they're not expecting, these come out of Iowa, so they wouldn't be expecting a fall crop. Like I said, we just have this beautiful corner of the world where we can get away with this, and to skip this and not do a fall garden when it's so simple and it basically takes care of itself is kind of a waste. So I'm encouraging it. If you do fall crops, plant the very small seeds. So you do need to thin is all I can say, because if you keep too many of these too close together, you're not going to get a good crop. If you can mulch it, please do so. If you've got leaves and whatnot, be very careful taking anybody's grass clippings, because you never know what's in them. This is something I like to suggest. If you're going to start your thin little seeds, if you top them with just starter soil, just a little covering, they tend to pop up a little bit easier than using the regular soil. Is a little bit harder, so you can get your crops going a little bit faster. And now that you've planted it, now you start eating it. Don't do this with the idea that you're waiting for an entire lettuce plant to completely fill itself out and then you're going to pick it. You start picking these plants from the outer leaves and let the center grow, and it'll grow through most of the season until we get that hard frost. The lettuces will keep going, the kales and the Swiss chards, all of those will keep on growing. What I love about the fall is you don't have to constantly go out there and water. They are short rooted, they don't have to have a ton of water going down to the bottom. And we're not getting evaporation. So your soil isn't drying out like it does during the summer. If you can mulch it, even better. Mostly what I'm trying to say to you is enjoy the process. If this is going to be stressful to you, one more thing on your to-do list, this is not your year to do it. It needs to be joyful. If you want to do something and all you want to do are 2 pots, like that white pot that I had shown you where my pansies was, if you want to do one pot of those and just have lettuces and kales growing out of that on your back porch or your front porch, go for it. Do what's happy and good for you, because that's what this is supposed to be about. So we've got this pretty picture, and it keeps on growing. You keep on eating until this. This is the first big frost. And I came back from a December vacation to find this, and it just looks miserable. But it's also telling you time to quit. This I would clean out. There isn't much here I would leave. But for your end of summer season survivors, This is a Swiss chard that lasted in a pot. This is, I believe that's one of my red kales. I have a pansy in here, but most of this pot died out. So I ended up using it for my next round of putting in peas for my spring. In this pot in the back, I had a lettuce and it had bolted because we got, you know how we always get that 1 week, seems like in January, February, where all of a sudden we get a week of warm and then it drops again. Well, one of my kales started bolting and I left it there. And I encourage you to leave that bolt. So when some of these first pollinators start coming around and looking for things, they can find something in your yard. So think carefully before you totally clean out your garden. Think about leaving some stuff behind for the pollinators. That's why I like that anise, because it becomes woody. And if you chop it off, there's like a little tube in there and bugs will go in there and overwinter. There's all the mulch that the bugs will climb under. You're hoping to be able to have some good bugs come out so that your birds will be looking for them once they start coming back in the spring. Birds need tender food. You know, they want gummy worms. They don't want Cheetos when it comes to eating for their babies, because they can't take the crunch. They need that soft stuff. So they need those early worms in the beginning if they can get it. So if you can do that and not feel like, oh gosh, it's such a mess out there, clean it up a little bit, but leave what you can. But at the very bottom, I'm pointing out to you, if you have anything that got diseased, through your garden in the summer, particularly tomatoes, or maybe some of your peppers, or maybe some of your squashes, don't keep those and don't throw them in your compost, throw them away. That's the best I can tell you, because some of the stuff overwinters, some of the bugs, like your squash bug, will overwinter in an old squash plant, so get rid of it as far as that goes. Don't give them a chance to come back and take it. So what are the benefits of gardening besides good food? Why should you do this in the winter instead of just putting your feet up? Because gardening is exercise. While you're out there creating the soil, you're bending over, you're walking, you're checking it out every day, you're snipping it, you're getting some exercise in the fall. To me, gardening is Zen. And if this can't be Zen for you, then this is not your hobby. This needs to be something where you can go out there and you feel joy when you're out there because you've done it. And you see how pretty it is, you know you're going to eat well, and you can share. And that's what gardening is also. You share the work, but you share the bounty of the garden. You learn to cook more, and that's why I really encourage a fall garden. I was talking to a guy at a garden I work at, and he's like, oh, heavens no, I would never consider doing that. And then we started talking, well, do you like lettuce? Do you like being out in your garden? Well, yeah, but you know, and then we kind of went on to how easy it would be for him to convert his summer garden into a fall garden. And I believe he's going to give it a shot, a small shot. It's not going to do as much as he did in the summer, but he's definitely going to do a fall garden. And that's what I'm encouraging you to do. If you don't go do a garden, or whether you do, I'm encouraging you to go look at some of the gardens that we as master gardeners take care of. There's a kitchen garden and a children's garden at the farmer's market. There's a garden at Francis Land House. That's where I contribute a lot of my time. And we haven't planted anything really for fall at this point. We're just cleaning things up. And then Norfolk Botanical has what's an official potager kitchen garden. They do all the design items that you're supposed to do, like you're supposed to have, you know, items that stick up, and then, you know, variation in leaf and colors and that kind of stuff. It's a beautiful garden, and the Norfolk Master Gardeners are doing a wonderful job of it. So I would really encourage you to stop by and take a look if you've got time. So almost last but not least, I always like to put this up to remind people that cooperative extension, there is a Virginia, but there's 50 cooperative extensions across the United States, because back in the 1860s, the Congress created land grant colleges across the United States. So every state has one, some have two. And then they created a cooperative extension program where extension agents would go out and help farmers figure out how to use the newest crops, the newest methodology for doing good crops. And then they created an extension master gardener program because they needed more bodies. So they train us, and we have access to all their information and be able to encourage you to do more gardening and do it scientifically correctly. If you have a question and you can't get to us, we aren't able to get right back to you. If you go to this website down at the bottom, pubs.ext.vt.edu, that is where you can put in your item, whatever it is you want to know about, and it will spit back whatever articles that you need to know. So always pushing what Master Gardeners are, encouraging you to become a Master Gardener if you aren't. Our next Master Gardener class is going to be on October 16th at 7 o'clock. Again, you'll join it by going to VBMG and clicking on the link. And it's going to be about bats, which I can't wait to learn about because I know nothing about them, but I see them in my backyard in the summertime flitting all around. So join us for that. And now I'm pretty much done, I think. And if there's any questions in the chat box, I'll stop sharing. But take a look at this thing. This is one of the things at the Virginia Beach Farmers Market. It's a very creative way that they've put their boxes there. But look at the way they planted it. This is what I'm saying. They didn't just plant and stick the same thing in each corner. They melded their colors. They melded their various things. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing at this point, and we can go back to the full screen if we can. Okay, and there we go. Do we have any questions I need to deal with, or is everybody fully smart and nobody needs anything?
So we do have a question. Can you buy builder's sand from Home Depot? Is it just called builder's sand, and how is it different from sand at the beach?
Oh, you definitely can. I can't guarantee you Home Depot has it right now, but yes, because my husband tends to need it for pitcher plants that he does when he creates the soil for them. You have to look around for it. You have to get the right kind. Okay. My suggestion is if you're really not sure, go to a more of a nursery to get a better quality of it. Okay. And anything else?
There was a question that I posted, substitute for peat moss since it isn't sustainable, and coconut coir was the recommended, and I just wanted to run that by you.
Yes, I know it is also being recommended over the peat moss, but it has some of its own issues too.
Right.
So there's no perfect trade-off at this point. It's somewhat better than eliminating the peat moss, because once it's gone, it's gone. But if you can use it, yeah, that's a good option too. But nothing's perfect as far as not using the peat moss or using the coconut, because it also has its challenges when you put it in the soil, and you really have to do it right. And that's why I don't think it's recommended through that thing. It's only last 10 years or so the coconut coir has really come out and started being well used. So if you want to try it in a portion of your garden and see how well that works compared to using the peat moss, that to me is a good experiment to try. I've not used it personally, okay, but I'm also at the point where most of my soil, I'm just adding compost at this point, so I haven't needed to do that. So and that's it for questions. Yes.
No, we have before I give the next question, thank you for filling out the gardening talk evaluation that's up right now. I appreciate that very much. What is the latest date you should consider starting from seed?
I would say from seed, as you watch the weather, okay, you can go ahead beginning very end of September, going into October, you can get away with it. So I would say the first week of October. The thing that we all have to deal with right now, and we just dealt with it today, and it's the rain. And if you try to put those seeds in too fast, I got 3 inches of rain in my garden today. And if I had put in my seeds, it all would have washed away. So that's why I'm trying to push you toward the end of September. But, people travel. You have to do it when you have to do it. If you do it in October, I have done it as late as October 16th, to be honest, and gotten a good crop. Is it a little bit slower to get going? Yes and no. Does it fill out as much? Yes and no. It all depends where I put it. If I put it in my raised bed, it did pretty well. When I put it in a container, like a big pot, like those big blue pots you saw, or the white pots, the colder it gets, I've got 4 sides on that white pot that are going to freeze, versus when it's sitting in my raised bed, it's not doing it like that. It's got that much more soil and that much more space that has to be frozen before my seed or my plant's going to give up the ghost. That's why I use that picture of that white pot, because whereas that white pot, everything wiped out, in my garden, it did not. And in those bigger blue pots that had that much more soil, it did not. So you're watching for the storms. You know, we generally, you know, we're going to have another hurricane that's going to come up this weekend. We may or may not get hit by that much rain. So the first 2 weeks of September, from my perspective, is we're getting a lot of rain. And the temperatures really haven't dropped yet. Shoot for the 3rd and 4th week of September if you can. If you can't, if you're going to go into October, like I said, I've gone as late as October 16th, but that was when we had a really warm fall. And I've been able to keep things, like I said, I've been able to keep Swiss chards going a whole year, and they're delicious, you know. So those are the things. It's a crapshoot when you're trying to guess the weather, because we never can quite get it. But I would say you'd be able to get away with murder here. You know, if you're really close to water, or you're in our little, you know, really off to the total southeast, fine. If you're sitting out in Chesapeake, or you're sitting out in Suffolk and you're listening to this, probably you want to get it in there by the 1st of October. It really depends. Those microclimates really, really do affect who's going to get what out of their fall garden. Okay. So is it I can't believe somebody's going to say, can they do a second crop of green beans? My garden, I am so green beaned out. I would never suggest another round of green beans, but I really think it's almost too late. If you haven't already had them in, they're not going to grow fast enough to be able to give you a crop. And then Asian chives also survive the winter well. Yes, the Asian chives do. The garlic chives do. They're delicious. And I really am, like I said, pushing those turnips. And okay, somebody says, my father-in-law started his cabbages in early August. His turnips are doing well. How early can you start the seed? And is your father-in-law, I'm assuming he's local? And yes, you can start your cabbages early, but if you have those plants out, you're going to have to be watching for those cabbage moths, because they're having a heyday right now, as far as I'm concerned. At least in my yard, they are. So yes, you can get them in there. His turnips are doing well, yes, because those are used to it. The Hakurai will do very well if you plant them in the next couple of weeks from seed. Okay. I think that's it. Yes. You see
Yes,
anything else,
I
Karen?
do believe.
That's it. Okay, so yes for local, yes. All righty. Well, I appreciate you all coming out. And that's it for me today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a fabulous presentation, and we look forward to seeing you all back for bats. Have a good night. Thank you.
Good night.